Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Grecia Suarez, and I'm the Logistics Coordinator at the Center for Mexican Studies at the United Kingdom at UNAM. We warmly welcome you to this special event, which is part of the activities for the International Day of Women and Girls in Science, 11th February, and the International Women's Day, 8th March. Unfortunately, our center director, Dr. Antonio del Rio, couldn't join us today, but he sends his warm greetings and best wishes for this webinar. It's our privilege to have with us Dr. Sandra Serrano, Senior Researcher at the Institute of Legal Research at UNAM and Director of the Observatory on Disappearances and Impunity in Mexico. Dr. Serrano is leading authority on serious human rights violations, the enforcement and effectiveness of human rights, and the intersection between gender and law, with a distinguished academic background that includes a PhD in law from the Institute of Legal Research at UNAM, Masters in International Human Rights Law from the University of Essex, and a law degree from the Instituto Tecnológico Autónomo de México. Her career stands as a testament to their commitment to justice and equity. Today, Dr. Serrano will present her talk titled Between Walls and Bullets, the Dual Violence Faced by Women in Mexico, in which she will address the challenges and the dual forms of violence faced by women in Mexico, a critical topic in the field of human rights. Before we begin, please note that this event is being streamed live on YouTube. We invite everyone to participate with questions. At the end of the talk, we will open a space for answers, so please feel free to leave your questions in the comments box. This could be in Spanish too. Por favor, siéntanse libres de usar el chat para colocar sus comentarios o dudas. Estaremos resolviéndolas con la doctora Serrano al final de esta sesión. Without further ado, it's an honor to introduce Doctora Serrano. Go ahead. Adelante, doctora Serrano.
Thanks a lot, Grecia, and it's a pleasure for me to share this space with the Center for Mexican Studies. A special thanks for Dr. Antonio del Rio for the invitation. I beg your patience and apologize for my poor English. I'm gonna need in some time some spaces just to order my ideas because I understand English, but I have some problems just to speak English. So, I beg your patience, and I apologize in advance for this. I'm going to share with you a presentation with some data and some graphics, just to have like a general idea of what I'm trying to share with you today. So I'm going to use this presentation. The main idea of my conversation with you today is to talk about different regimes of violence that affect the violence against women. Violence against women in Mexico today is part of a complex network in which different forms of violence interact and take place in different regions of the country. So what we have right now is that we have a gender-based violence, like the normal gender-based violence, but also we have other kind of violence that are affecting women, and this violence has also a gender dimension, but are of different kind because of the perpetrators and because of the modes of this violence. So we cannot isolate the violence against women in Mexico just to analyze in in one line the gender-based violence, and in another line like the violence produced by the states, and then the violence produced by organized crime. We have to interact all this kind of violence to understand what is happening right now in Mexico. Because what is happening is that violence is transformed and reacts to the context of other forms of violence. So we do not have right now like the normal approaches to the violence against women. So this is experiencing very significant changes in the perpetrators, in the modes, in the characteristics, and in all the mechanisms of violence against women. I think that the main point here is that we understand that we have different regimes of violence that are interacting and that are producing violence against women. We have like the classic gender violence against women, but we also have the state violence, and we have the organized crime violence. And these three spheres of violence interact with each other and produce new forms of violence against women. All of them have a gender dimension. All of them are part of the gender social order, or all of them have a patriarchy dimension, but operate in different ways. So the new products of violence are very different from what we are used to understand of our common knowledge about violence against women. And what we are doing in the Observatory of Disappearances and Impunity in Mexico is trying to understand these different regimes of violence, not only against women, not only the violence that produced against women, but the violence that produced in the country. We have a specific area of studies that are trying to understand what is happening with women, but we are trying to understand this in a global sense. Well, if we only look at what is happening with the women, we are going to understand these different mechanisms that operate when these three orders interact, when these three regimes interact. I'm going to share with you our definition of regime of violence, because this is going to help us along this conversation, but also to understand these interactions. We understand in the observatory as a regime of violence like the rules of access, use, and circulation of the means of violence at a given time and place. In other words, how is violence exercised? By whom is it exercised? In what manner? How does it circulate? This is a definition that Karina Solavere elaborated for our project, the observatory. And what we are trying to understand with this is who are the perpetrators? What are the mechanisms used and the means used by the perpetrators? How these different regimes operate against women? Which are the new forms of violence against women with this interaction produce? So this is our general definition on regimes of violence. I'm going to start. I want to share with you some specific ideas about what is the Mexican context in general, not only against women, but in general, because to understand this interaction, these three different regimes of violence and who are the perpetrators and the mechanisms that they use, I think that it's important just to have like a general lines of what is happening in Mexico right now. Obviously, the violence in Mexico didn't start in 2006. It started in I don't know, like in the revolution. Mexico is a violent country, and it has been a violent country all the time. But 2006, it changed the dynamics of this violence, and it increased the violence. In 2006, President Calderon started what was called the War on Drugs. This was a war started against the drug trafficking groups, especially the drug trafficking groups, and in general criminal organizations. And the war on drugs started with a group of military operations against these criminal groups. Military operations conducted especially by military and then by the army. These operations obviously produced a lot of violence, not only against the criminal groups, but also against the civil society. And this is very important because not the violence wasn't just against these two main actors, but against the civil society. And then we have a lot of disappearances, a lot of torture, a lot of gender violence, a lot of different kind of crimes and human rights violations committed by these two actors, the military or the armed forces in general, and the criminal organizations, not just between them, but also against the civil society. So the clashes between the armed forces produce or increase the violence against the civil population. And there is a third actor. I'm not going too deep on this actor, that there's the businesses and the businessmen, because they took advantage of this context and they are part of this enormous network of crime in Mexico. But it will require a different conversation, not the one that we are taking place right now. But one of the components of, or the main components of this context is that we do not have just these military operations and the increase and the strength of the organized crime, but we also have high levels of impunity and corruption at the three levels of the state: at the federal level, at the state level, and at the municipal level. So there is no way to escape from this kind of violence, because these actors control the justice system and the security system. And this is one of the main characteristics what we are observing now in Mexico, and that affect especially vulnerable groups, but in a specific manner affect women. So we have these actors that started to maintain control of some areas, of some regions of the country in different periods of time. Sometimes the military or the armed forces have more control of one region, and sometimes the criminal groups have some more control of another region of that country. So the violence is permanent, and the violence it changed the mechanisms, but is always there. Not in the same dimension in all the country. It changes from one region to another, but it is there. No, the violence is there. And what we have today? This is an example of a criminal network. And this is an example of a criminal network in Coahuila, Mexico, in 2011. It's not the network that is present today in Coahuila, but this is the network that is present in 2011. This was the research of a colleague, Daniel Vasquez. What we are seeing here is how these three main actors operates in Mexico. We have the Zetas at the left part of the screen. That this was one of the main criminal groups at Coahuila and in the northern part of the country. Now it is no longer. Now Zetas no longer exist. And we have then the politicians, the small p that you can see in the graphic, all of them are politicians. And then we have these businesses, these big businesses, most of them related to mining and coal mining especially. So this is what we have. And these three actors, as I was telling you, control the justice system and the security system. And this is the context in which we are talking about violence against women. And not only insist on a gender social order, but a very complex scenario of violence in general terms. So what is happening in the case of women? What we have in the case of women is that we have we are observing changes in the dynamics, and we are observing changes in the mechanisms and in the perpetrators of the violence against women. This graphic that I'm sharing with you right now is from the Instituto Nacional de Estadística y Geografía, is the National Institute of Statistics in Mexico. These are official information. And this is just like a kind of picture of how gender violence is understood right now. But these are like very important data because, for example, the 70.1% of women in Mexico reported that they have suffered some kind of violence. So the violence against women is very extended in the country. And I think that one of the main problems here is that the violence is produced especially against girls and young women. But that's why the 70.1% of Mexican women reported to have suffered some kind of violence, especially psychological violence and sexual violence, that are the main two kinds of violence that women in Mexico suffered. But the mechanisms behind this data are what is important for us, right? Well, these changes in the dynamics in this context of Mexico, that is my special interest to share with you. What are we seeing? Well, these are the data of disappeared women and murdered women. The blue line are killings of the blue are the missing women, and the yellow one are the killings of women. If we see this graphic, what we can understand is that the two problems have similar behavior over the years. Oh, they move in the same way. They have almost the same kind of movement, these two indicators. But what is shocking is that the numbers that we are seeing here. We have a lot of human that is disappeared and a lot of human that has been killed during these years. The war on drugs started in 2006, but the changes in the violence against women started essentially in 2015. So we have like this information starting from 2015 to 2023, and we can see the movement of more women that have been disappeared and more women that have been murdered during these years. So we have these two main problems. Probably there are more data and we can find more data, for example, in the case of women that has been tortured or the case of women that has been illegal detained or other human rights violations. We have other data around these other topics, but I think that these two indicators, the killings of women and the disappearances of women, are very important to understand the new dimensions of the violence against women. So let's start with the first problem, that is the violent crimes against women. Violence crimes against women also has a relevant an increase have increased during the years. I'm so sorry, I tell you that I have problems with my English. But as you can see, we have two lines. We have the blue line and the yellow line here. I'm not taking here just the femicide because of the current problems that we have with the classification used by the prosecutorial offices to distinguish between femicide and homicide committed against women. So these two lines are very important for us. Sometimes the prosecutorial offices don't want to classify as femicide the murderers of women because it impacts the statistics of the state, and the state doesn't want to acknowledge that there is a real problem of violence against women. So some of the homicides are classified just like that, like homicide, but not femicide. So we have to take into account both data, the data of femicide and the data of intentional homicide or violent deaths of women in this period of time. And what is interesting here is that right now we have a rate of 5.5 per 100,000 inhabitants of killings of women. This is a really high rate, not comparable with many countries. In short terms, we have 10 women are murdered per day. If we sum these two numbers, and these also are official data. This also is official information. So we have this enormous number of women that are being killed along the country. None of these killings are acknowledged of femicides, but are violent homicides against women. That is what is important, this distinction that I am trying to share with you. But the problem doesn't stop there. The modes of occurrence of the murders of women are also changing. In 2000, 30.5% of the murders of women were committed with firearm. Normally, in the normal approach, in the classical approach of violence against women, what we have is the women women were killed by knife or by asphyxiation, and we have these two modes of murder in the years before 2015. And firearms were used, but were not extended in the country. But all of this changed in 2008. The statistics changed then. What we are observing right now is that by 2023, 61.3% of murdered women were killed by firearm. This means that and the 30% were by hanging and 11.7% by knife. These are information produced by a civil society organization, Data Civica, in 2024. This is very important information because what we are seeing here is that this increase of women that are being killed in this 5.5 high rate and 10 women per day, most of them, 6 of each 10 women, are killed by firearm. Mexico is the 6th country with the most guns in the world. So we have a huge problem of guns in Mexico, and these guns are being used to kill women. So we have this first change. Now women are not killed by asphyxiation or by knife. They are being killed by firearms. The second change has to do with where does violence against women occur. The normal approach to gender violence says us that women are killed at their homes or private places like a hotel or the workplaces. And what we are observing right now since 2015 and 2008 and then 2015 is that the public sphere the main place where women are killed. In 2023, 52.2% of women were murdered in public streets. So now this informs us that there are different perpetrators that are killing women. It's not just a well-known perpetrator by the victim, a family, a partner, an intimate partner, or a colleague in the workplace. Perpetrators that are taking place in this increased violence against women. And they are committing these crimes in the public sphere. They are committing in the streets, not only in public spaces, but mainly in the streets of public transportation. So they are not hiding the crimes. They are killing women and they are not hiding it, like the classical literature on gender violence tells us, no? Like that the gender violence occurred in hidden places by well-known perpetrators, by the victim, No, and by asphyxiation or knife. Now, like what we have right now is that most of these killings are being committed in the streets. And now let's go to the second problem, the disappearances of women. Well, what we have here is that we have a lot of persons that are disappearance in Mexico. We have to March 25th, 2025, yesterday, I took this data from yesterday information of the register. We have 123,144 people disappeared in Mexico. Most of them are men. This is true. Most of them are men and are young men, very young men, like 15 years to 25, 30 years are most of the disappearance in Mexico. But if you can see again that these two lines have a very similar behavior. As we can see them in the killings, we can see here in the disappearances. The behavior of the disappearances of men and disappearances of women is very similar. So we have to understand what is happening, because we are in front of a change of the dynamics, because before 2006 we didn't have a lot of women that were disappeared. We have some men that were disappeared because of what was called the Guerra Sucia against the leftist groups in Mexico, but we didn't have a lot of women that were disappeared. But what we are facing right now, again after 2008, is that it's a constant increase in the disappearances of women. Nowadays, 40% of the disappearances are women and 60% are men. What is important here, again, is the age. Women that are disappeared are very young, again, children. We have that 55.4% of missing women are between 10 and 19 years old. So we are talking about girls. We are talking about very, very young women who are suffering this violence, especially the disappearance. And what is happening? Well, when we talk about the disappearance, it is difficult to try to understand the disappearance phenomenon like if it was a one problem or an isolated problem that it's producing the same ways in the country. What we what we understand now is that the disappearance change from region to region and from year to year. So we have to investigate to understand the disappearances of persons, not only of women, in different regions. So we started our research in the north part of the country, in Coahuila, Nuevo León, Chihuahua, Tamaulipas, and then we moved to the center part of the country. These states that I am sharing you some information of the disappearances of women: Ciudad de México, Estado de México, Tlaxcala, Morelos, Puebla, which are states that are in the central region of the country. Why we did this? Because if we analyze just the north part of the country, then we find that there are some women that were disappeared in the first years of the war on drugs, but they don't have they didn't have. Now they have a problem of women that are disappeared, but in those years they didn't have a problem of disappearances of women. And when we move to the central region of the country, to these 5 states, we find out that the women disappeared more than men, equally or more than men in this region of the country. There is a clear trend of increasing disappearances of women in the central region of the country. So this does not follow like general trend of the country that men disappear more than women. In the central part of the country, we find out that women disappeared more, even the same or more than men. So we have this tendency, this tendency of increasing disappearance of women. And one of the main problems that we found is that even though women is located more rapidly than men, because most of the women that are disappeared are related to some of the perpetrators. So this image of the intimate party, the intimate perpetrator or the well-known perpetrator by the victim operates here. Even though this, it remains a lot of victims, of women victims, still are disappeared, because there is in the aggregate of the women that are disappeared and the ones that are located. In the aggregate, we found that there is no improvement of the location of women, so they continue the activities of searching and location of women with the same policies that exist before all our legal structure after the war on drugs. So they use techniques and they use mechanisms for searching women that are disappeared that not always are in line with the new context of violence and with the new perpetrators. So these old mechanisms are useful for like the well-known gender violence, like the violence committed by a family member or by a partner, but are not useful if the disappearance is committed by the state or is committed by a member of a criminal organization. So this is going to change in the near future, unfortunately for women. And we also found that these disappearances of women in these five states of Mexico are related to other kind of violence. As I was telling you in the beginning of this conversation, the disappearances and the killings are not isolated. It interacts with different kind of violence. So what we found here is a high ratio of homicide to disappearance of women. For every intentional homicide, 0.69 women disappear. A high relationship between femicide and disappearance of women. For every femicide, there are 0.66 disappearances of women. A very high relationship between rape and disappearances of women. For every case of rape, 0.72 women disappear. These are not causal relationships, but they allow us to affirm that the disappearance of women is not a phenomenon isolated from other forms of direct violence. So it interacts with the homicides, with the general homicide rates, and it interacts with other gender violence crimes that are committed in ways that. So I think like that our general conclusion in this part of our research is that where the violence against women increase, or the violence in general increase, the disappearances of women are going to increase too. So it's not only a problem of the gender social order, but a problem of the general violence and the interaction of different violence that we are experiencing right now in Mexico. And we also found that the characteristics of the regime of violence in the disappearance changed the ways of the disappearances of women in a similar way that in the killings of women that we saw earlier. We found multiple perpetrators. We found the perpetrators that are well known by the victims, but also the organized crime, the trafficking networks, and in some cases, the state authorities are committing these disappearances. We also found that the violence against women is sometimes a cause of the disappearance, and sometimes the consequence of the disappearance. The cause of the disappearance is, for example, that someone disappeared, a woman, just to commit a second crime, for example, femicide, or trafficking, or human trafficking. But what is more striking is that the consequence when we analyze that most of the disappearance of women are like a consequence of other disappearances, and they have a dimension, a gender dimension. When we analyze this consequence, what are we talking about? The disappearance doesn't have any specific objective for I think what I mean is that the objective of the disappearance is not mainly the women, but for example a member of her family, her father, her partner, her son. But the women disappeared, was accompanying this man, was in the same house, was in the same car. So the the criminal organization or the state authorities took all the persons that were in the house, all the persons that were in the car, or all the persons that were wherever they were. And so the women disappeared because of their relationship with someone else, with a man. Once they are disappeared, they suffer direct violence, sexual violence sometimes, but also they are obliged to perform care activities for the members or in benefit of the members of the criminal organizations, or they are obliged to pursue to perform different kind of activities once they are deprived of their liberty, of their freedom. Sorry. So, well, what we have are these two modus operandi. The one that is a cause, the objective of the disappearance is the women, and one that sometimes the women is not the objective were some other men, but women are there. Women are in the house, women are in the streets, women are in the car. So they took all the persons that are with the main objective that are the men. But the women suffered from suffered different kind of violence while in captivity. And these cases also have like a high impunity. We doesn't know what is happening with these women. Most of these women, especially the ones that were disappeared as a consequence of being with a man, we doesn't know where they are. Sometimes the ones that are disappeared as a cause of gender, than the first cases, they are located, as I was telling you, but the second group of women are not located because they follow the log of the main person that was disappeared. So this is what happened right now in disappears. Now, if we have these two main problems, if we have this killing of women problem that is changing, the firearms are more used, the women are killed in public spaces, and if we have these characteristics of the disappearances of women that are disappearing because of gender-related causes or with the consequence on gender, with a gender dimension, what are the possible explanations? Well, what we have found, we in the observatory, we at our research, but also what some NGOs, what the civil society is finding, especially organizations like Data Civica or Intersecta, is that all this violence against women, the increase of violence against women and the change of the violence against women is related to the state violence and obviously to the organized crime violence. And it is related especially with the increase of circulation of weapons, with the military operations, which related to a long-term increase in homicides of women. But even though we have all these relations or correlations, if we can put this, if we want to put this in statistics terms, we do not have a causal model. We cannot say that there is a causal relationship between the military operations and the public security controlled by the armed forces and the increased circulation of weapons with the increase of violence and the changes in the violence against women. I think that this has to be our next agenda of researching on women, because because we can establish these relationships, but it's very difficult to establish a relation of causality. What Intersecta, the civil society organization that I told you, did was a statistic model, and they found this. According to Intersecta calculations of the 4,000 clashes that occurred between 2007 and 2018, for each additional army clash, the murders of women 3 months after the clashes increased an average by 2.12%. In the case of Navy clashes, the estimated increase in women's homicides was 12.5%. 1 year after the army confrontations, the average increase in female homicides was 1.31% and 6.7% in the case of Navy confrontations. So what this information of Intersecta tells us is that once the military operations occurred, the violence against women is permanent or increased more for women than for men in the long term. So I think that this is the first model that tried to bring all these relationships or these correlations to a causal model, but I think that we have to deep on our agenda of researching these topics more. So I don't have like an explanation. I have just these different relations, but not a plausible explanation for you. And I want, if you are interested in this term, in these topics, in these problems, I invite you to open your research agendas to try to build a causal model that try to explain all these correlations. But finally, I want to share with you something different, the women of us perpetrators, because all the other graphics and all the other data tell us about women as victims. But in this context of regimes of violence that are interacted, we also have women as perpetrator. This is the network of Veracruz, another state of Mexico that is in the south part of Mexico. This is only the network of women and their immediate contact in the criminal, politician, or businesses organization. What our colleague Daniel Vasquez found here is that women are intermediaries in the networks. Women have a very important role right now in the crime networks, in these macro crime networks where the politicians, the criminal organizations, and the businesses interact. The women have a very important role. With the information, they produce the information that is produced by these main actors is trafficked by the women. So the connections between the different actors is made by women. So women right now, they don't have like a very important role, at least in this network in Veracruz, but they have very important. They don't have the main role, but they have very important roles as intermediaries in these networks. So this is going to change in the near future. Also, the presence of women in the criminal organizations, and probably is going to change again the kind of violence that women are facing because of their new roles. Probably we are not going to see much more relation with gender-based violence, but with general violence in the case of women, with these changes in the criminal structures in the country. So what we can do if we have like this scenario? Well, it is necessary to make the analysis of gender-based violence more complex, as I was trying to convince you since the beginning, that we have to understand these three regimes of violence, the classic gender violence regime, but also the state violence produced by the armed forces, by the security, the public security authorities, and the violence produced by the criminal organizations, and try to look what is new, who are the perpetrators, and try to understand more about these new dynamics of gender violence. We have, and this requires us to situate gender-based violence against women in a specific time and place. We cannot talk about gender violence against women in Mexico in general terms. Well, we have this percentage of 70% of women that reported that have suffered some kind of violence throughout their lives, but this is not enough. We have to try to distinguish the kind of violence that the women are suffering in the north part, in the south part, in the central part, because it depends on also of the perpetrators and the mechanisms that the perpetrators are using to commit this violence. So we have to look at its interactions and intersections with other types of violence. The patriarchal gender-based violence persists, but is reinforced in the presence of other regimes of violence. So we have to open this agenda and to contrast a different data and different information. As a feminist lawyer that I am, I cannot just look about what the literature on gender-based violence tell me. So I have to go to the literature on organized crime and to the literature of criminal governance and the literature of human rights violations, just to try to understand what is happening right now in the violence against women, which is a very complex problem in the country. So muchas gracias, and I'm here to answer your questions if you have some of them. I really hope that I was a little bit clear with the presentation, or the PowerPoint was useful to understand what I was trying to share with you. Thanks a lot, Grecia.
Doctora Serrano, I deeply thank you for your presentation. The data and analysis that you have shared with us today are truly revealing and present us with a clear picture of present Mexico regarding violence against women. Your research not only exposes the statistics, but helps us to understand the complexity of the structures that perpetuate this dual violence. And this analysis invites us to reflect on the urgent need to implement structural changes in our institutions and in our society in general. So in this moment, you, the people who are with us, can share your questions or comments. You can turn your microphones or leave them in the chat. También pueden hacerlo en español, no hay ningún problema. Si tienen alguna duda o comentario, pueden hacerlo ahora directamente en la caja del chat, o pueden abrir su micrófono. Igual pueden darle un comentario a la doctora Sandra. La verdad es que su investigación es muy buena. Sí, estoy un poco como impactada. Well, if there's no questions at the moment, I have one question. In your experience leading the Observatory of Disappearances and Impunity, what patterns or trends have you identified in the intersection between gender violence and forced disappearances?
We found this, like that the disappearances of a person is like a mechanism used by the criminal groups, but also by state agents to disappear the opponents. So women are there. Sometimes women are the specific target of the disappearances, but many times no. If we are talking about in general terms, because in the central region of Mexico, we have also the human trafficking, a very huge problem of human trafficking in human trafficking, and especially of young women. So we have these three dimensions. We have like the intimate violence, and some women are disappeared because they are going to be victims of another crime like femicide. And then we have the women that are disappeared because they are in the middle of the war on drugs, and they can be disappeared by the state or by a criminal organization. And then we have the human trafficking. So some of the women are disappeared because they are going to be victims of human trafficking, of transnational organizations of human trafficking, not only Mexican organizations. And we have a huge problem. So we have three different problems that affect the disappearances of women in this region of Mexico, in this central region of Mexico. And one of the main problems here is that the mechanisms to search these women and to locate these women are very different. That if the women disappear because it's gonna be a femicide, for example, it was disappeared by her partner, then the tools that the authorities have to use are very different than if the disappearances of the disappear of the women was committed because they want to commit human trafficking. The tools are very different, so it imposed to the authorities a lot of challenges in this to try to locate and to find these women.
Wow, that's very interesting. I didn't know that about the different tools about what happened with this problem. If Well, there's no questions in
I think I
YouTube.
have a question,
Oh, go ahead, Electra.
if that's okay. Thank you so much. This was really, really interesting, and thank you so much for doing it in English. I was wondering if, because some of the research I've read on the topic has said that there's an important racial aspect to femicide rates, and that it affects Indigenous women and darker skinned women in Mexico. And I was wondering if you had found that in your research, and if you'd found causal reasons for that.
Mm. This is a very interesting question, Electra. We didn't have enough. We don't have enough data on this. We know that there is a real problem of violence against Indigenous women and migrant women. But Data Cica, this organization of civil society, and Intersecta, I think that more Intersecta than Data Civica, are pursuing some research on migrant women and Indigenous women in this context of violence, in this context of complex violence against women. So I think that if you look of what Intersecta is producing, you can find more about Indigenous and migrant women, because we have other behavior of the states, of the criminal organizations when they are facing Indigenous women. We had 2 cases against the Inter-American Court of rapes committed by armed forces against 2 Indigenous women, Inés Fernández Ortega and Valentina Rosendo Cantu. These 2 cases are examples of the violence committed by the armed forces within this kind of operations on the war on drugs. So you can look at these 2 cases, and you can look at the research that Intersecta are doing on Indigenous and migrant women. I'm sorry, I don't have like a first-hand information on this, but there is obviously a problem, a specific problem with women in this complex scenario of regime of violence.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Serrano, and thank you, Electra. There's another hand raised. Tim, go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Serrano. My question pertains to the role of the armed forces. Like, how is their impact measured, and how is their role measured in the disappearing, the violence against women? Are there statistics available, or are there just examples of it? Where did you find that data? Thank you.
Well, this is a really interesting question too, because we have a national register of persons that are disappeared. This is a public register, and everyone can access to this information. However, this information does not distinguish between the disappearances that are committed by armed forces or other security bodies in the country and disappearances that are committed by private actors or criminal organizations. So what we have are the registers, the private registers of some of the colectivos de víctimas, organizations of victims, that they have their own statistics of that are produced in base of the information that they have of how a disappearance was produced. So this is one of our main sources to understand the dynamics, but we also interview some of the authorities that are conducted the search of women in the 5 states that we, in the one we conducted our investigation. And we also look at some data that other universities, CIDE, the Centro Estudios, Centro de Investigación y Docencia Económica in Mexico, had access to one register of killings and military operations in the country. This is not a public information, but they have access, and I think that they publicized this information in their webpage. I don't know, some years ago, but I think that it is no longer in their webpage right now. So we have like these registers, the private registers from the victims, and we have these interviews and some information of the authorities of the institutions that are in charge of the search of the searching of women. But there is no there is no like a general register that allow us to distinguish between the perpetrators. Also, the Inter-American Court has ordered Mexico to organize in a different way this register to allow the people to distinguish between the enforced disappearances committed by armed forces and those committed by other agents, private or criminal organizations agents. So we had to review this information, so it is not accessible in general terms. And this is how we obtain our data: interviews, personal registers of these collectives, and that's all.
Thank you, Doctora Serrano.
Muchísimas
Isabela?
gracias.
There's Isabella, you can talk.
Oh, hi. Yeah, thank you so much for doing this talk. It was all really, really interesting, and thank you for doing it in English again. I was just wondering, you said that more women are becoming perpetrators in the violence as well, and I was reading some interviews with women on it and some literature on it, and the thing that came across was that most women were saying they were joining because they saw it as an economic opportunity and a way to like provide for their family. I just wondered what your thoughts were on why more women are joining and what kind of has changed that's bringing them into the criminal organizations.
Well, I think that we have to distinguish between, in which scale of the criminal organization are these women? Because in the low level of the criminal organizations, there are a lot of women. There are a lot of women that suffer a lot of violence too, and their entrance is because of economic reasons. But then, in the middle level and in the high levels of the criminal organizations, the participation of women is not only because of an economic reason, but it's because they were born and they grow in a context of crime and in the context of this war on drugs. So the criminal organization is part of their life, and they are trying to escalate in these organizations as part of a way of growing. Like I study a master and then a PhD for being an academic. If they learn how to be, if their life is related to the criminal organization, they want to be in the high levels and in the middle levels of these criminal organizations. they are empowered women, even if they are criminals, but they are very powerful women that also are using, in some cases, a narrative of feminism, not direct feminism, like in our terms, like we are discussing, like a feminist, but this narrative of the empowerment of women and the power of women. So we can find these women, especially in the middle level of the criminal organizations, and in some cases in the high level. But this is part of their lives. Is that the criminal organization is the one that structure their family, that structure their friends, that structure the way they know the order in their community. So being part of these criminal organizations is being part of the main decisions. So that's what women are escalating in the levels of the criminal organizations. And it's not only an economic reason like we can find in the low levels of the criminal organization. We have to do more research on this. These are some notes that I can tell you, Isabella, but we have to make more research on this to understand the role of women in these criminal organizations and why they are intermediaries, because it sounds to me like they are like confidence, or that we can trust in women, no? And we also have like a gender role behind this role of intermediaries. But we have to research more on this. But we have to understand this, that the criminal organizations structure the life of most of the young women and men in most part of Mexico. So they want to be part of these criminal organizations.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabella. Thank you, Dr. Serrano. I think there's no more questions and our time has done. And well, I would like to thank you all for joining us today and for your insightful questions. And from the Center for Mexican Studies, we extend our sincere gratitude to Dr. Sandra Serrano for sharing her expertise and shedding light of this critical issue. We also appreciate the active participation of our audience, both in person and online via YouTube. Please continue to share this knowledge and stay tuned for future events that celebrate and promote the contributions of women in science and technology. Have a great day and see you the next week. Bye. Gracias. Ya terminó de